After a pretty crazy week in the NBA in which you saw hundreds, yes, hundreds of players across the league enter the health and safety protocol, multiple game postponements, including the Bulls vs. Raptors game, which was actually the third postponed game for the Bulls so far this season, we head into yet another week of likely more of the same with postponed games, more players and coaches heading into the protocol. But for the Bulls, all of their players who had initially gone into the protocol, they had all cleared and returned to the lineup, but then of course you had three new players enter the protocol in Lonzo Ball, Tony Bradley, and Alfonso McKinney. You saw guys like Zach Lavine, Dosunmu, Troy Brown Jr., and Matt Thomas back on the court, but of course Billy Donovan was not on the sidelines as he was also out due to the health and safety protocol. So we got our first glimpse at seeing Chris Fleming as a first-time acting head coach in the NBA. But with most of the players back and having been well rested, especially with all the game postponements, the Bulls are certainly going to need it for the packed week they have ahead of them, not only playing in a second game of a back-to-back tonight, a traveling back-to-back at that, but 4 games in total this week, at least at the time of this recording anyway. Starting tonight in Atlanta, taking on the Hawks again on Wednesday, but back in Chicago for that game. Then facing the Pacers yet again on Friday, but unlike last night's game, it'll be in Indiana. And then they'll close out the week on New Year's Day on Saturday in DC against the Wizards. So a lot of games. A lot of traveling. Like I said, it's a good thing the Bulls got a good amount of rest over these last couple of weeks. So in today's video, let's talk about these upcoming games, what to expect, keys to each game, and of course, my predictions for this week. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I think it's important to note that because of the continued outbreak around the league, it's possible that some of these games are subject to change if they are in fact postponed. The Hawks in particular have a lot of guys under the protocol right now, and those are the first Bulls games, 2 games this week. So for the purposes of this video though, we're going to assume that all these games will be taking place. So let's start with tonight's game, which, because the Bulls are playing the Hawks in a back-to-back, the preview for each is going to be pretty similar. Now for the Atlanta Hawks, they've had a pretty underwhelming season thus far compared to the Cinderella story that they had last season in which they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. They're currently 15-17, 3-7 in their last 10 games, and sitting 11th in the East outside of the play-in spot at the time of this recording. I mentioned this when I was a guest on the Locked On Bulls podcast. I personally thought the Hawks season was a bit of a fluke last year, and it's part of the reason why I had put the Bulls in front of them before the season started, despite most pundits having the Hawks finishing top 4 in the East. And part of that was because I felt Trae Young was going to struggle with the new NBA foul baiting rules. However, I was wrong in that regard because Trae is actually still playing incredible basketball and scoring at an incredible rate, averaging over 27 points per game. However, his free throw attempts per game have reduced dramatically from last season because of these new rules. He's currently getting to the line at 6.3 attempts per game compared to nearly 9 attempts per game last season. All of that being said, though, the Hawks have struggled relative to what we saw from them last year. Not only that, but like many teams, the Hawks have been pretty decimated by COVID, with over 9 players having fallen into the protocol at one point. So keep in mind, this game, or games I should say, could be postponed depending on if more players in fact fall into the protocol. Now again, time of this recording anyway, Trae Young is still under the health and safety protocol, but could very well be cleared by Wednesday's game. Clint Capella, who was in the protocol, has been cleared and actually played on Christmas Day. Now Capella hasn't had as great of a season as he did last year when he led the league in rebounding, was scoring over 15 points per game and 2 blocks per game. But because he's still a force, a great defender, an elite rebounder, he's going to make it challenging for Vucevic in both of these games. Really, Vucevic is going to need to operate from outside and spacing the floor because Capella isn't as good at defending the perimeter, and overall where he struggles is defending bigs who can spread the floor and shoot from deep. So hopefully we'll see these next 2 games against the Hawks where Vucevic will actually be shooting from 3 well and not having one of his off nights, which we have not seen most recently, but we have seen earlier on in the season. But he has started trending in the right direction and playing more consistently and being more aggressive, also playing in the post. Now, if Trae Young is cleared to play, This is going to be a big assignment for whoever is guarding him, especially with no Lonzo Ball for the Bulls, who you can always kind of rest easy with him guarding the opposing team's best scorers. Lonzo has proven to do that in multiple games so far this year against the likes of James Harden, Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard. Obviously, where Trae is the most lethal is shooting from way outside, so whether it's Ayo or Coby, they're going to need to be defending the perimeter all of the way out to the logo. But also because Trae is so great on the dribble drive, you have to ensure you stay with him in putting the ball on the ground and driving quickly to the hoop. Coby and Ayo are going to need a lot of help defense from guys like Lavine and DeRozan when Trae Young is making those drives. I mean, look, part of the reason the Hawks have struggled this season, aside from players being out due to COVID, but that applies to a lot of teams, but because its teams have finally started to figure out that in order to beat the Hawks, you have to lock down Trae Young. The Hawks don't have as many scoring threats as they used to outside of Trae Young and John Collins, who also is out due to the protocol. And because Young isn't able to get to the foul line as easily as he used to, you have to exploit that to your advantage. Now, all that being said, the Hawks are not a good perimeter defending team, and so Lavine and DeRozan, even Coby, they need to expose this weakness by going at guys like Trae Young, Bogdanovich, Kevin Huerter, and even Cam Reddish. These guys are not good defenders, and when you have three accomplished scorers like the Bulls do, you have to take advantage of this mismatch on offense. So that applies to those first two back-to-back games against the Hawks. Then the Bulls traveled to Indy to take on the Pacers yet again. Really, the keys to this game, very similar to last night. Hit the Pacers hard with strong offense, run the ball through Lavine, ensure Vucevic continues to play aggressive and crashing the boards and protecting the paint. And for the love of God, protect and take care of the ball. You can shoot well like they did last night, but the Pacers are going to hang around if you get sloppy and don't play with effort for the whole game. The Bulls got a little complacent at times at last night's game, and that allowed the Pacers to go on runs and remain within striking distance. Then finally, the Bulls will close out the week the following night on New Year's Day going against the Wizards in DC. Seriously, so much traveling packed into 1 week. But this will be the Bulls' first look at the Wizards of the season. And the Wizards started off the season very strong to where you thought they might even be one of the top contenders in the East. But I personally knew that the law of averages would start taking effect and they would fall into the middle of the pack or a fringe playoff team in the East. However, they're still above 500 and sitting 6th in the East, which isn't bad as they've had a good amount of talent on their team led by Bradley Beal, although he isn't having the best season for him anyway, but they've got the former six-man of the year in Montrezl Harrell, who is having a nice season for them. Kyle Kuzma, who they picked up in that Westbrook trade, along with KCP actually, and of course they signed Spencer Dinwiddie in free agency. But he hasn't really been all that was advertised, at least in terms of how much they signed him for. And of course they have my guy, Daniel Gafford, who you guys all know was the only trade I was not a fan of last season and thought that it was way too early to be giving up on Gafford at his age. And of course, seeing the Bulls and their roster now, we certainly could have used him for some depth in the front court. But be that as it may, the Wizards team, this is a decent team and not a team you should take lightly, which really the Bulls, after a loss to the Rockets as an example, they should never take any team lightly. But because this is going to be back-to-back after a long week of traveling, the biggest challenge I see for the Bulls is coming out strong with energy and not letting the jet lag and fatigue get to them to let the Wizards get off to a strong start and light up the Bulls early, because we have seen this where the Bulls fall victim to that in a back-to-back game situation. Now for Bradley Beal, he's the Wizards' main scoring threat. So I'm actually curious if Billy Donovan, or I guess I should say Fleming, if he'll be switching a guy like Dosunmu a lot on Beal for most possessions when he's in. Lavine's defense has improved this season, but he's still not the defender Ayo is. And for the Wizards, when you really only have one lethal scorer in Beal, you kind of have to put your better defenders on him if you're the Bulls. And hopefully, if Caruso is back by then, you'll see him on Beal as well. I mean, the Wizards' second leading scorer is Montrezl Harrell at 14.5 points per game. I mean, they're not a strong offensive team like they were last season, currently 23rd in the league on offense in terms of points per game. So this is a game where the Bulls should use their offensive firepower to their advantage. Still play strong defense, obviously, but mainly focus most of their efforts on the offensive end when you know you're not going to get a strong scoring output from a team like the Wizards. I am curious to see how Gafford is going to perform against his former team, especially now that he's been inserted into the starting lineup for the Wizards. People always talked about how he wasn't a starting center in this league, but he's actually proven to play well in that starting role on the Wizards, although he hasn't been playing starting minutes at 21 minutes per game, but he's averaging over 9 points per game, 6.3 rebounds, and nearly 2 blocks per game. He also has one of the highest PERs on that team, and I'm curious to see how he'll do playing against Vucevic, as Gafford did struggle a bit against big-bodied centers who can spread the floor. For the Bulls anyway, I mean, this is a key matchup for Lavine going against another top shooting guard in the league in Bradley Beal. Beal isn't a great defender, and so you would hope that Lavine will take advantage of that. And the same goes for DeRozan, who isn't any match for guys like Kuzma or Denny Avdija, and trying to guard him in his mid-range game and ability to shot create. The challenge I see with this game is simply the fact that it's the 5th game in 7 nights for the Bulls after multiple plane rides going from Atlanta back to Chicago to Indy and then DC, and it's arguably the best team that they'll be playing from the week, at least record-wise anyway. The Bulls match up well against the Wizards, better than they do a team like the Pacers, so that leads into my predictions for the week. I think the Bulls are going to go 3-1 this week, only losing to the Wizards in their final game. And again, it's not because I think the Wizards are a better team or that they're a bad matchup for the Bulls. I just think that it's going to be a trap game for them in the schedule, being the second half of a back-to-back and 5th game in 7 nights. I could see the Bulls falling in one of the games against the Hawks, depending on who/how many players are actually going to be available from the protocol. As of right now, they're completely depleted. But if the Hawks are without Trae Young, I don't see them beating the Bulls in either game. I want to know what you guys think, though. What are your predictions for the week for these 4 games? Let me know in the comments. I'll have a live game chat for the game tonight, so feel free to join that if you'd like. And as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.